Hey, what's going on, Guardians? My name is the Black Link, coming back at you live, well, I guess live at recording, on September 23rd, 2021. Yet another Thursday. You know what that means. It's time for another issue of the Bungie Weekly blog, This Week at Bungie. Been kind of a rather busy couple of weeks for Bungie, and Destiny 2 as it were. Of course, we had the release of Trials of Osiris 2 weeks ago. Went great. Last week we saw some iterative changes to matchmaking with the flawless pool and all of that. It went a little bit less than great, but also saw some pretty positive changes moving forward. Well, this week we're learning about some more Trials changes that are going to be going live tomorrow, as well as taking a retrospective look at some of the statistics from last week's change to Trials and Week 1. So, without any further ado, let's dive right on into the TWAB. First up are the Trials changes we'll be seeing tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're kicking off our first Trials labs. These experimental weekends will allow us to test our targeted changes to the game mode and collect data and feedback on what works and what should remain an abomination of science. In keeping with our Trials revamp this season, we are sticking to our test and learn mindset not only with labs, but also with matchmaking, rewards, and other quality of life improvements. This week, the normal Trials of Osiris playlist is replaced with Trials Labs Capture Zone. This new mode is still elimination, but with the following changes. 1. 30 seconds after the round starts, a capture zone will be enabled. Players can capture this zone to win the round, or just eliminate the other team like normal. The capture zone has a waypoint from round start, including a countdown timer, so everyone will know exactly when and where it'll be. The capture zone starts in the middle of the map in the first round, and changes location each round. The team who just lost gets the advantage spawn location. Also for this week, double Trials rank points for every match. If you're feeling the blues of Fabled and Mythic, this is a great week to go ahead and get that Crucible reset. So right off the bat, we're getting a look at the new game mode that we're going to be experiencing in Trials called Capture Zone. It sounds interesting, and it's definitely going to be neat to see a different game mode make its way into Trials of Osiris. But it's not the only changes that we'll be seeing tomorrow. Next up, Bungie talks a lot about the player numbers from last week's Trials. Of course, they introduced the flawless player pool last week. And while it certainly received a polarizing response in the community, we're going to be getting a look underneath the hood to see exactly the effect on the Trials population that these changes had. Here's what Bungie had to say. One of the main changes they made with Trials this season was to allow solo and duo players to queue up. This had two main benefits. 1, it allowed players a low barrier of entry and expectation to try the mode out, and more importantly, it increased the population enough that fire teams of mid-skilled players landed more wins than if they had only matched against other mid-skilled or high-skilled teams. Solo players are a key to the entire system working. For example, in their first week, a whopping 54% were full fire teams versus solos and duos. Cut to week 2, where only 45% were fire teams versus solos and duos, which is a pretty sharp drop. To get enough solo players in, we need to offer rewards that are good enough and matchmaking that feels reasonable regardless of skill level. Right now, we have engrams that you can grind for, as well as attractive 7-win rewards, but only if you win. And then we get to dive on into some of the statistics between Week 1 of Trials of Osiris in Season 15 and Week 2. They learned a lot from the first 2 weeks of solo matchmaking. In Week 1, solo wins accounted for about 23% of games, whereas blowouts, which are 5-0 losses, accounted for about 38% of games. Most worryingly, the blowout rate for solo players went steadily up over the weekend. That means more of them were happening over the weekend. But then in the second weekend, the matchmaking changes pushed that rate back down. So here's some of the stats for Week 2. Solo wins accounted for 36% of overall Trials games, whereas blowouts, again those 5-0 losses, accounted for only 29% of games. This feels a lot better for solo players, but obviously it had some side effects for fire teams of mid to high skill. Long term, we are looking to keep the solo win rate above 30% and the solo fire team blowouts underneath 33%. Next, they talk about wanting to keep a relatively high quality of games in Trials of Osiris. They talked about blowouts as one way of looking for competitive matches. They also consider 5-1 matches as non-competitive. The sweet spot is really between games that go 5-2 and 5-4. Those matches tend to feel good while playing, even if you end up losing. In Week 1, we saw 60% of matches end at either 5-0 or 5-1. In Week 2, the number of non-competitive matches dropped to 52%. A nice improvement, but they'd like to see this number drop to 30 to 40% over the long term. One of their biggest goals is to keep matchmaking times low while still getting matches with good connections and a competitive outcome. This is one of the big complaints from the trial's flawless pool last weekend. Bungie states that they always keep an eye on matchmaking times whenever they want to make serious changes to the matchmaking landscape. In both weeks, the average matchmaking times were pretty steady at just under 50 seconds per match. Not bad at all. And the only reason it was even that high was because players who started off on a terrible streak would end up in a matchmaking pool below the base pool that only looked for other players who had started off losing 10 rounds in a row. It's a very small pool with matchmaking times that last over 4 minutes before the system gives up and expands you back to the base pool. And of course, they go on to state they're going to continue adjusting the matchmaking in trials moving forward. But we learned about some pretty interesting stuff after that. We had just over 700,000 players last weekend, only 50,000 players fewer than week 1. Bungie states that this is higher than they expected, given a normal drop-off after launch combined with Distant Shore being a much less popular map. Plus, they still had 253,000 players go flawless. Those are still some pretty good numbers. Games were overall 10% longer, but they believe that's mostly due to games being more competitive. Next, they talk about some of the things that they feel definitely did not work with last week's changes. First, we saw 34% less matches played overall, and the number of matches post-flawless dropped by a whopping monumental 45%. This means teams that went flawless, players that went flawless, accounts that went flawless largely stopped playing after they hit flawless. That's a huge drop in your post-flawless player pool. They also state that they had reports of significant numbers of players resetting at 5-0 or 6-0 cards, but in reality only saw around 16k total cards that were reset while flawless but still under 7 wins. They also state that normally they see nearly 50% of the players who go flawless doing so with someone else who is already flawless. Last week, it was 56%. This of course can either be a traditional carry or just people playing with friends. That number dropped to 16% this week, which Bungie states is unacceptably low for friend game content. So between that and the number of post-flawless games dropping by 45%, those are two huge statistics. That means a lot of people really weren't digging the flawless matchmaking player pool. They essentially, once they got one character flawless, they just stopped playing trials at all. Which of course in the long run probably isn't going to be too healthy for the game mode. But taking all this into account, here's some of the changes that Bungie is going to be making to address these issues. 1. Moving forward, they're going to be waiting until Sunday morning reset, of course 10 a.m. Pacific time on Sunday, to enable the flawless matchmaking pool. This will serve as a middle ground between week 1 and week 2, and as the semi-permanent placement for enabling the flawless pool. And as always, they'll be looking at both analytics and feedback, so keep telling them what's working and what isn't. They're also working on some deeper matchmaking solutions, which they hope let them remove the flawless pool. Look out for more info in mid to late October. Finally, they're going to be turning off matchmaking help until you've played at least 2 matches during the weekend. I think that's a pretty fair change. A lot of people, like I said before, had some pretty serious opinions about the flawless matchmaking pool. I didn't think it was the best way to handle a real problem that Bungie has with trials. And that is, of course, the influx of more casual players and more solo players is definitely good for the Trials of Osiris game mode. But I didn't quite feel like taking everybody who goes flawless and then quarantining them off into their own player pool was the best way to incentivize more solo players to come in. So pushing that flawless player pool off until Sunday, late in the weekend, I think is a pretty good middle ground. It's going to be interesting to see how that affects the player numbers this weekend. And even with all of these changes, they're still expecting to take another swing at matchmaking to help keep some of the solo and lower skill protections from week 2 without strongly negatively affecting flawless players. But other than that, updates in Trials TWAB reports will be less common as they continue to get Trials into a more stable state. But Iron Banner will be back next week, so there won't be any Trials of Osiris. But alright, there we go. That's it for the biggest bits of Trials news in the TWAB. And like I said, there's a lot of good stuff there. I think Bungie's done a really good job of revamping the game mode and making it more welcoming to a much larger population, which can only be beneficial for the health of Trials. I wasn't on board with the whole flawless matchmaking pool last week, but I'm happy that they're kind of moving forward with the matchmaking here. I think moving that off until Sunday at the earliest is probably a good move. But it's not the only thing we had to talk about. We've got another fashion show going live in the Destiny 2 universe. If you think you've got a good enough looking Guardian, all you gotta do is share a screenshot of your Guardian's appearance page and use the hashtag ThreadsOfLight on either Instagram or Twitter. Bungie will be picking winners until September 30th, so make sure you get your submissions in by then. The last thing we have to talk about is a brand new batch of Twitch Prime gaming rewards. I've talked about this a million times. If you've got a Twitch Prime or Amazon Prime account, you can link your Prime gaming account to your Bungie account and enjoy some monthly exotics and Eververse rewards. This time around, we've got the Dark Horse Exotic Sparrow, the Bandwagon Exotic Ship, the Rustpunk Exotic Ghost Shell, and the Hold On Legendary Emote. Make sure you go and pick those up from Amanda Holiday in the Tower. But alright, Guardians, that's pretty much it for the biggest bits of news contained in this week's issue of the Bungie Weekly blog, This Week at Bungie. Really interesting stuff with Trials there. Very happy that Bungie is continuing to update this game mode based on the numbers, based on the feedback, and try to make it the best version of Trials we've ever gotten. They've done a lot of great work here with Trials of Osiris, and they've really got something good on their hands. Hopefully they can continue to refine it and make it fantastic. But alright, that's it for this one. That's it for the news. Those are my thoughts, and be sure to leave me yours down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like, make sure you subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest stuff we're putting out. But for now, thank you all so much for watching. And as always, I am the Black Link. You Guardians, stay frosty.